You are listening to the podcast of the Academy of Professional Celebrants, the UK's premier celebrant training provider. Whether you are an established celebrant, or if you're just starting out, or if you're wondering if it's the career for you, our podcast is here to inspire, to help you tap into the knowledge and experience of our many celebrants and the wider industry. So join with our host, Derek Duncan, as we dive into the world of celebrancy, sharing with you tips and advice from our extensive network of celebrants and others in the industry. We are the Academy of Professional Celebrants, and we are here for you. Your success is our success.
Hello and welcome to the latest and very special edition of the Academy of Professional Celebrants podcast. We hope that the podcast continues to be a source of inspiration for you and that you continue to find useful tips and insights in the conversation that follows. I'm your host, Derek Duncan, and joining me today is Tim Purves. Tim is the chairman, owner and director of William Purves Funeral Directors, a fifth generation family owned business based in Edinburgh. Over the years, the company has also expanded into the Borders, North East England and Tayside, and offers its services to family in all of those areas. We're very grateful that Tim and his staff have allowed us to record the podcast here in their headquarters at Oakvale in Edinburgh. Hello Tim, and welcome to the podcast.
Hi, thanks for having me.
You're very welcome. You, Tim, are part of a proud history and tradition in your company, and I wonder if we might begin the podcast with you recounting the story of the company from how it started to where it is today.
Sure. Well, the company's been going a long time, 136 years now, 1888, so I'll try and do it quite quickly so we don't sort of take up all the time talking about that. But ultimately, the company was started by my great-great-grandfather, and he actually originated in the Scottish Borders, in Duns, in the Scottish Borders, and he was a joiner, he was a cabinet maker, and in those days what actually happened was he decided he was going to emigrate to New Zealand, and he ended up here in Edinburgh, obviously liked it so much that he never left. And so really that's how we started in Edinburgh. And as I say, in those days he was a cabinet maker and a joiner, and I suppose what would generally happen is the local joiner would often be asked to make a coffin for families for a funeral, and before long I suppose he was doing more of that and less of the other joinery work that he was used to, and so really the funeral side took over. And so that's how we started as a business. And then over the years what happened was his son took over from him. Quite an interesting story with regards to him as well, actually. He served in the First World War, and while he was away serving in the First World War, his mother was poorly, not very well, and so he was sent home on compassionate leave, and he was part of the Royal Scots Guards serving over there, and while he was there, the rest of his regiment were all actually killed, but he had been sent home on compassionate leave, so he actually survived. It's one of those sliding doors moments where had he not been sent home, that might have been the end of the business.
Yes.
But he obviously took over from his father, and then it worked its way down, and my dad took over from his dad. His dad actually died quite suddenly when my dad was still quite young. My dad was just in his early 20s, and his father passed away. And at that stage, it was still a very small business. We had one office, and there was about sort of 4 or 5 members of staff. And really, at that stage when my dad took over, being the young man in those days, he was concerned that families wouldn't use him because they all knew his dad. His dad was just in his early 50s when he died. And so, my dad, thankfully, families did still come and use him. And really, from that period is when we've started to grow the business. Really not much until the early 2000s is when we've slowly grown the business, and much of that's been with acquisitions, buying other funeral directors. Some of it has also been by opening up branches in different areas as well, but that's really where we've come from and how we've got to where we are today.
I believe you've just opened your latest branch as well, very recently in the last week or so. Yep,
so just 2 weeks ago I think it was in Barnton, part of Edinburgh. Yes. So that's our 27th branch now.
Wow. So you preempted the question that followed that. How many branches are there? So 27, and that's the nation as opposed to Edinburgh itself.
Yes, that's right. So we really now range from, we have an office in Elgin in the north, that's our most northerly one.
Yes.
And then right the way down to Whitley Bay, so just by Newcastle is the furthest south branch. We have a whole sort of cluster of branches in the Northumberland area, in and around, you know, market towns like Morpeth and Alnwick and Ashington and places like that. And then we have several in the Scottish borders as well, in places like Galashiels, Jedburgh, Hawick, Selkirk. And then we have one in Peebles, and then we have a number in and around Edinburgh. So in Edinburgh itself, in different areas, and then in some of the towns just around Edinburgh, so Pennycook, Dalkeith, Haddington, these sort of places. And then further north, we have some in the Dundee area, so we have one in Dundee itself, we have one in Broughty Ferry, we have one in St Andrews. And then further north again, we have one in Inverurie, and I've already mentioned the one in Elgin.
Yes.
So
fairly widespread.
Yeah.
So you sit at the head of this large organisation, and like any large organisation, there are lots of moving parts within it. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the number of different roles that people play within your company.
Yeah, of course. When I started in the business, we were a lot smaller. We probably only had about 3 or 4 branches actually, and most people had to do every role. Yes. And as we've grown, we've sort of had to specialise and people do certain roles. So these days, obviously, the main role that a lot of people will know about is the funeral director role. Now, how we operate is slightly different to some of the other funeral directors that operate today. Our funeral directors will also meet the families and arrange the funeral.
Yes.
That's quite different to some of the other funeral directors, other companies, because they'll have a funeral arranger in the office who arranges the funeral, and then a funeral director will just conduct the funeral and be there on the day. From our point of view, we think that it's very important to have the same person that meets the family and then conducts the funeral on the day, because they've already formed that relationship with the family member. And it means that they know who they are. They're not the family are not turning up at the funeral on the day wondering who's the funeral director that's going to be looking after us. So that's the main role that a lot of people will know about. But we have many other roles within the company as well. I mean, the other role that often people will come into contact with would be our administrators, yes. Whether that be a receptionist who does a lot of the administration side of things. You know, they'll be sort of typing up newspaper notices and sending those off to the newspapers, or doing the paperwork side, you know, the invoices and things like that. But they'll also be the person at the end of the phone often, if you phone, that you would speak to initially. And then we have what we would call a funeral operative. Now that role varies quite,
yes,
you know, considerably as well as to what they do. Part of that would be the drivers who are driving the cars on the funeral, and they would also maintain and wash the cars and look after them at the garage. But some of our operatives would also be involved in the removal side. So when someone dies in a hospital, they would be involved in actually collecting the deceased from the hospital and bringing them back into our care. So that's what we would class as a funeral operative role as well. And then we have obviously our embalmers who would take care of the deceased. So they would you know, have them so that they're presented in the right manner. They would dress them in the clothing, they would wash the deceased and prepare them in all those manners. We have other operatives who would prepare the coffins for the funeral. And then I suppose out with that, like every other business, we have a finance team that would look after the financial things. We have our marketing who look after the PR and marketing, and you know, that's grown hugely with the digital side of things. And then we would have our HR manager as well that sort of looks after that side. So there are quite a few different roles and quite a few moving parts within all of that.
And as you say, if we're a family or a celebrant, we're only going to really come in contact with 2 or 3 of those roles, but behind those people there's a kind of huge array of experience and work going on. In terms of the people that we would come into contact with as celebrants, are there specific qualities that you're looking for in terms of your office staff, your funeral operatives in the day, and your funeral directors? Yeah, no, absolutely there are. I've often said that being a funeral director is not actually a very difficult job. It's actually quite a simple job, but it involves 2 sets of skills that generally do not go hand in hand. You've got to be very good with people, you've got to have the people skills, but you've also got to be very organised. Yes. And generally in life, what you often find is that people are good at one and less good at the other. For us, they have to be good at both.
They have to be able to meet with families, converse with them, talk through, find out what they're looking for. But they've also got to be organised and make sure that they book the crematorium and book the celebrant and organise the catering at the hotel or whatever afterwards. They can't sort of let one of those drop. So that is obviously something that is quite important in our role, which would be the same in your role.
Yes.
I think for us as well, we talk about our values a lot within our company, and we have 4 core values, which are compassion, dedication, integrity, and respect. And those have to be aligned with the people that we're employing as well. We have to see that they live these values in their own lives, and it's not just a sort of work thing. So for us, getting the right people is the key thing. We're not worried if they've never done this job before, because we can teach them the skills. That's the easy part. But it's getting the right people is the very important part to us. And if they've never done the job before and they need to learn these skills, no problem at all. We can teach them. But let's make sure that we're getting the right people in.
Yes. And talking of those right people, and maybe it's because I still feel young myself, but I know I'm getting older, and I've noticed that a number of your staff are relatively young when I compare them to the staff of other funeral directors that I work with. I just wondered if that's something that you actively look to do, or is it just so happening that they're well suited to their roles?
You're not the only one that sort of at times feels old when you look around and see the other members of staff. No, I mean, it's not been something that we've actively gone out and said we need to get somebody of a younger age or anything like that. I think from our point of view, we see this job as something that becomes a vocation. It's something that if you get into, you probably often are going to do this for the rest of your working life. Now, it doesn't always happen like that, but that's how we would often see it. And so when we're looking to get people, if we have someone who is younger, who shows all the attributes and the skills that I talked about earlier, then we have no issue with employing them, worrying about them being young. And I think for a business, it's good to make sure that we have a mixture of age ranges as well. Within our funeral directors, for example, it's good to have some younger people who are coming through, so it's not all an aging workforce, people who've been here a long, long time and are sort of more looking towards the end of their career. So yeah, you're right, there are 1 or 2 that are on the younger end of the scale, but like I say, I think that's a positive thing.
I think so as well. I know that because you're at the head of this large organisation, you're unlikely to meet celebrants who have called in for an appointment, to celebrants who are starting their journey. So that job is entrusted by and large, I guess, to your wonderful team of funeral directors. But what qualities do you think are important for a celebrant to display? And a little kind of naughty follow-up on that is, what would maybe stop you using a particular celebrant?
Okay. I think for us, being a celebrant is probably quite similar to being a funeral director. I mean, I've talked already about the people skills and being organised. I've talked about the values that we have. And I think all of that would be really important in a celebrant for how they perform in their job. One thing that we always have to remember, and I'm talking about us as funeral directors, but it probably comes through for celebrants as well, is that we are in a service industry. We are here to serve the bereaved families. That's really what our role is. And so sometimes we will be asked to do something that might put us out a little bit. And it might not just be the most straightforward, it might not be the easiest. But I think if it's important to the families, then that's certainly something that we should be pursuing and doing. And I'm using the we in a wider scale here. The celebrants, I would say, falls completely under that as well. I've often said that families will come and ask for something in a funeral that I would not want for my loved one or, for my funeral. But it's not about that. It's not about what I want, because there's probably things that I would want that other people would be looking and thinking, well, I wouldn't want that. Our job is about choice these days. It's about providing for the families what they're looking for. We've always said as long as it's legal and it's decent, then why would we not do it? Our sort of motto within the company here is if somebody asks for something, let's start with the answer is yes, unless there's a reason we can't do it. So many other companies and people out there, the first answer in their mind is no. You've got to prove or explain why we should be doing this. And I think it has to be the opposite way around in our line of work when we're in a service industry. So to answer your question, I would say that. I would say, putting the wishes of the clients first, as long as that's based on what I said earlier about being good with people and being organised and, living values that matches in with the role that you do.
Yeah, and I was working with one of your funeral directors recently, and it was the coffin that was the issue for the family, and they wanted a particular colour of coffin.
Yeah.
And your funeral director said, well, we can paint it that colour.
Yeah.
And that's what happened on the day. And I was able to kind of tie in my tie with the colour of the coffin, and people in the congregation were in that colour as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, that personalisation of things.
Yeah.
It's important to use a company, and it's important to Celebrants as well.
Yeah.
There's been a very exciting recent addition to your fleet in the form of a Land Rover Defender hearse, Tim. I wonder if you might tell us a little bit of the story of that hearse and what it's bringing to your company.
Of course. The reason we have the Land Rover hearse is really because of my cousin Andrew, Andrew Purves, who works in the business. Andrew is into cars.
Okay.
Far more than I am, okay? He's always been someone who's into vehicles, he's a wee bit of a petrol head. And I suppose the whole thing started because 2 or 3 years ago, we had a family that actually requested a Land Rover hearse. And when we looked to get one, first of all, it was very, very difficult to get one. And then when we did get one from another company, we looked at it as funeral directors with our funeral directors' hats on and thought, it doesn't actually serve the family as well as it could do.
Okay.
Now, what I mean by that is the design of it wasn't completely ideal. For example, when the coffin was placed on it, there was no room for us to be able to place a flower on top of the coffin. There just wasn't the height for that. But there was no room at the back of it to place the flower at the back either. So we were left with the coffin going in the Land Rover hearse, and then we had a flower that we didn't actually have anywhere to display it. Now, in our minds, we felt the flower is quite an important part to the whole proceedings. So ultimately what happened was Andrew came along he's one of the company directors as well, and he came to the board meeting one day and said, what do you all think about us potentially looking to build our own Land Rover hearse? And I suppose what we have found over the years is that the hugest thing that has changed in funerals is the choice that's available to people. I mentioned earlier about the requests and things that we get asked for that we've never A, done before, or B, not something I would want for my funeral, but it's not about that. And I think this was something else just like that, where this is offering families choice. So that's one of the reasons why we thought, let's do this.
Yes.
And also because the offering that was out there that we had seen certainly didn't seem to do the job very well. So that was why we started down that process. And so what happened was we bought a base model Land Rover. If you were to speak to Andrew, he'd give you all the technical data about what kind of vehicle it was.
Another podcast all by itself.
I will not give you that because I'll get it wrong. But we bought a base vehicle, and then we took it to a company based just at South Queensferry called Engine 710, and they ultimately did the conversion for us and converted it into a hearse. So now we have the Land Rover hearse that, yes, we'll use it for our clients, but we're happy to offer it to other funeral directors as well. So if a family was to ask their local funeral director for a Land Rover hearse, we'd be more than happy for us to be able to hire that out and use it on other funerals.
And has it been used regularly since you added it to the fleet? Yep.
So we've used it an awful lot,
yes.
And we've had several other funeral directors who have used it as well.
It's quite a striking thing to see if you get the chance, and I believe it might be on your social media. There's a little video about the making of it.
Yeah, no, absolutely, so, yeah. We've tried to sort of publicise that a little bit and just let people know that this is out there. But yeah, there should be videos about it, and if not, get in touch with us and we can certainly direct people in the right place to find that.
Brilliant, thank you. If you're watching this podcast, then the Academy of Professional Celebrants is the UK's premier training provider. We offer training in person or online in all aspects of celebrancy, and we'll look after you every step of the way after you've completed your training. Please visit our website to find out when and where training is taking place. We'd love you to become part of our ever-expanding celebrant family. Tim and I are going to take a short break and we'll be back with you shortly.
Prepare yourself, because we are going to dissect what makes a fantastic celebrant directory listing. Being visible in online celebrant directories is crucial for increasing your inquiries and your bookings. However, simply having a listing among numerous other talented celebrants is not sufficient. To secure bookings, successful celebrants understand the importance of standing out. Your directory listing should be eye-catching, inspiring, and evoke an emotional connection. This turns a dull, easy-to-scroll past listing into a captivating magnet that draws in ideal clients for meaningful ceremonies. We are offering valuable tips on infusing personality and purpose into essential listing elements such as your title, description, images, services, and contact information to showcase your expertise. With a listing that radiates passion and dedication, you will encourage more visitors to visualize your significant role in their special day. Here are 11 essential tips for enhancing your celebrant directory listing. Let's transform your celebrant directory listing into a compelling, irresistible tool for attracting bookings. Follow these 11 steps to elevate your listing, making you stand out for all the right reasons and ultimately securing bookings. Craft an attention-grabbing headline. Begin with a concise, impactful headline that includes your business name and a unique selling point. Keep it brief and easily readable. Invest in professional images. Use high-quality images that represent your business effectively. Consider images from ceremonies you've conducted, arrange a brand photo shoot, or participate in styled shoots with other wedding or funeral suppliers. Create a compelling description. Write a detailed yet succinct description of your services. If you offer various types of celebrancy, provide distinct descriptions for each service and highlight what sets you apart. Use bullet points to emphasize key services, including any special offerings like hand fasting. Highlight your unique selling proposition. Use this opportunity to showcase what makes you stand out from competitors. Whether it's your experience, style, or unique packages, make it clear why clients should choose you. Utilize keywords. Include relevant keywords and locations in your listing that potential clients may use in their search. This helps clients see that you're a good fit for their needs and boosts your visibility in directory searches. Provide clear contact information. Ensure your listing includes current and accurate contact details, including phone number, email, and social media profiles. Make it easy for clients to reach out to you. Incorporate social proof. Build trust with prospective clients by including customer testimonials, reviews, awards, or any notable mentions. Request reviews from past clients and make it simple for them to provide feedback. Include a strong call to action. End your listing with a clear call to action inviting potential clients to contact you, visit your website, or book a consultation. Showcase any accreditations or affiliations. Highlight any professional accreditations, certifications, or memberships to boost your credibility. Use logos of relevant organizations if available. Promote special offers. Mention any promotions or discounts for first-time customers to incentivize bookings. Keep your profile updated with any special deals to attract more clients. And regularly update your listing. Keep your listing current with any new services, offers, or changes to ensure it remains relevant and engaging. Refresh your photos periodically to maintain a fresh and appealing profile. Choosing the perfect profile photo for your celebrant directory listing. In the world of celebrancy, where establishing personal connections and trust is essential, your directory photos play a crucial role in making a positive first impression on potential clients. These images serve as more than just visual representations. They are an invitation for clients to connect with you and envision your involvement in their special occasions. Your profile photo is the initial point of contact for clients before they even click on your listing, so choose wisely. To ensure your photos resonate with your target audience, consider the following tips. Opt for professional photos only to maintain a polished and credible image. Select images that reflect both your professionalism and unique personality. Choose photos that place you in celebratory settings to give clients a glimpse of your services. Aim for a welcoming and approachable expression in your photos to encourage client engagement. By adhering to these guidelines and selecting photos that align with your celebrant brand and personality, you can attract your ideal clients and set the stage for a successful celebrant-client relationship from the start. LocalCelebrant.com is owned and operated by APC, the better way to find a celebrant anywhere in the UK and soon to be hitting the international market.
Your success is our success. The Academy of Professional Celebrants.
So welcome back to the second half of this podcast with Tim Purves, Chairman and Director and owner of William Purves Family Funeral Directors in Edinburgh. Remember, if you want to take part in a future podcast, or if you have any thoughts or ideas on what you might want me to cover and explore in the future, then email me at derek@apcuk.org. That's Derek, DEREK, at apcuk.org, and we'll try to get something organised. Welcome back, Tim.
Thank you.
So as such a trusted and well-known business, you get entrusted with a lot of high-profile funerals, from politicians to TV stars, and of course your company is well known for having been involved in the arrangements for the funeral of the late Queen. Now, the funeral of the late Queen is quite obviously not the kind of funeral where somebody walks in off the street and asks for your help with it the day after somebody has passed away. So I wonder if you could share with us a story of how you got involved in the planning for that in the first place, and just tell us a little bit about everything that surrounded it as an event. And I know that you were personally heavily involved in that.
Yeah, I mean, I think the first thing to say is it was a real honour and a privilege to be involved. And I don't just mean that for me personally, I mean for the staff in our company that were involved in it. I was so proud of the role that we played, we being my staff, not just me. Yes. I feel that, you know, we did ourselves, you know, a really good service in the way that we honoured Her Majesty. So to be involved in that was a real proud moment. I often get asked, how did that happen? How did it come about? Did you just receive a phone call out of the blue to ask if you could help? And I always say, no, it doesn't just work like that. Yes. You don't just sort of suddenly get called upon on the day and asked if you can look after Her Majesty the Queen. This is something that we've been involved in for many, many years. A long time ago, we were approached by the Lord Chamberlain's office to ask if we would potentially be involved. And it was always potentially, because we would only ever be involved in any funeral with the royal family should they be in Scotland. If they were to pass away out with Scotland, then we would not have any involvement at all. So it was always one of these things that you sort of, at the back of your mind, you thought, we may be involved, we may not. And I suppose I do remember speaking to my cousin Andrew. I've already mentioned Andrew. Yes. But I do remember speaking to Andrew in the lead up to this and sort of saying to Andrew, on one hand, it would be lovely to be involved and it would be such an honour and a privilege, but on the other hand, I'm really not sure if I would want the pressure of being involved and what would all come with that. Now, over the years, we are involved in rehearsals and we meet with the Lord Chamberlain's office to discuss the briefing note, the plan, yes, as to what would happen. When we first were involved, the planning note was very small. Over the years, it has grown and grown and grown, and we now have a document that's about 800 pages in size. This covers absolutely every detail of what would be to happen. So, for example, when we were at Balmoral, in the briefing note, it tells us what drain pipe we are to park the hearse next to. It's down to that level of detail. So we are told through this briefing note exactly what we've to do. And there would be rehearsals that happen throughout the year as well. So we would meet with the Police Scotland to talk through things. We would meet with the Army, the bearer party, so that they can practice and rehearse shouldering the coffin. We would meet with the Lord Chamberlain's office. We would meet with the Lord Lion, who really looks after everything within Scotland. And so these meetings happen throughout the year. They happen all the time, just so that we were always ready should anything have to be activated. And that's really the format of how it worked. And so very early on, I received a phone call from the Lord Chamberlain's office to say that Her Majesty had passed away and we would need to be activated. So myself and Andrew, initially, we went up to Balmoral the day that Her Majesty died. And really, we were up there immediately and looked after the practical side of things. And then the next day, some other colleagues came and they brought the hearses up. Now, I say hearses, plural. We always have to have 2 hearses when it was for the royal family. The reason for that is, should one break down, we kind of need to have another plan, yes, as to what would happen. And so we have a reserve hearse that follows along behind. There's what's called the bubble, which is the whole procession of vehicles that are in that. And then there's a second bubble that follows along behind, and the hearse, the reserve hearse, would be in that. And really, it was I mentioned earlier about how the sort of lead up to it, we always sort of felt, would I want the pressure and how would we cope with that? Actually, what happened was it all happened so quickly, and Andrew and I were up in Balmoral very quickly, and we were within a police cordoned area. So there was no press, there was no members of the public. It was very private and it was very sort of personable as well. And we were there interacting with the senior members of the royal family. And actually, what really shone through to me is that they are, yes, they are the royal family, but they're actually still human beings who are going through a bereavement. Yes. And on one level, this is what we do. This is what our skill is in how to deal and cope with that. And so we were able to talk them through and guide them through that process without it being, you know, sort of overwhelming us as to what role we're playing here. So, as I say, everything happened very quickly. And then obviously we had the drive down from Balmoral, and I was in the hearse for all of that. And there was the emotional side of it, just seeing the streets lined with people and seeing what Her Majesty meant to members of the public. I probably wasn't prepared for the emotional side, actually, and it really did hit me, not necessarily at the time, but it was afterwards. It sort of made you realise just the outpouring of grief that we saw. But everything went very well. We didn't have to use a reserve hearse, which was a good thing from our point of view, and everything went to plan and exactly how it was meant to. So to be involved in that, like I say, was a real honour, and it was a proud moment for us as a company.
And I presume your company, after the hearse arrived in Edinburgh, it arrived at Holyrood Palace, is that right?
Yep.
And then did she lie there overnight and be taken up to St Giles by yourselves as well?
Yep, exactly what you said. So our role was, obviously, she died on Thursday the 8th of September 2022. It's a date that's ingrained in my brain. Okay. And Andrew and I were up there immediately at that stage. We had lots of rehearsals and things that were going on in Balmoral, and then we left Balmoral on Sunday the 11th of September 2022. And that's when we made our journey down, and that was a sort of 7.5, 8 hour drive. It doesn't normally take that long, but obviously we were going quite slow at different times and you know, through all the major sort of cities and things as we were coming along. And we arrived at Holyrood House, and so then Her Majesty went into Holyrood House, and that was a private sort of vigil, I suppose, for the family to be able to pay their respects with Her Majesty. And then the next day, we then arrived and we had a ceremonial procession from Holyrood up the Royal Mile to St Giles Cathedral. And that was quite moving as well. I mean, the Royal Mile is not a big street, it's quite narrow. Yes. And it was absolutely packed with people. I was sat in the hearse and we made our way up. Now, what we had a guard of honour that sort of really walked up with us. We had the bearer party, and then we had the royal archers who walked in a ceremonial pace up the Royal Mile, with the royal family then walking behind the hearse. So the king and his siblings all walked up behind. The street was lined with people. It was, you know, several people deep, you know, thousands and thousands of people. But what really struck me was how silent it was. As we were making our way up there, I could hear the footsteps of the bearer party and the archers as we were marching up there. Now, at times you would hear people applauding, or people would start singing God Save the Queen, but really, for a lot of it, it was silent. And that really sort of struck me, just that moment of being involved in that and making our way up to St Giles Cathedral. And then the next day, that's when the stage when Her Majesty was laid in St Giles Cathedral for members of the public to pay their respects. And she was there for 24 hours for people to queue up, and they could pay their respects by going past the coffin. And then the next day is when we then went back to St Giles Cathedral, and we actually then left and went out to Edinburgh Airport, where we joined a huge aircraft there. So a C-17 it's called, which is a huge aircraft. Mm-hmm. And really that's how she was transported from Edinburgh back down south for the funeral to happen there. Mm-hmm. That aeroplane, I mean, to sort of try and describe it, if people hadn't seen it in the flesh, it was huge. And it had one of these drop-down doors that came down. It's a kind of plane that you would imagine in war movies, yes, that all the soldiers are lined up on the side. It's bench seats along the sides, and they would all sort of like the door would drop down and they'd all parachute off and run and jump off. It's very noisy inside, I was led to believe. You have to wear ear defenders. And the Princess Royal, she travelled with her mother, with Her Majesty the Queen, for that journey. So she was in the plane for that journey down. But that plane, when it started to taxi away from where we were positioned, we were off to one side after Her Majesty had been taken into the airplane. I suppose one of the things that we were always told was that after the plane takes off, we still had to wait around for an extra half hour.
Yes.
Which on one level you think, well, why is that? If that plane was to get into difficulty and had to come back to Edinburgh Airport, it couldn't come back to an empty airport where everybody's left. So we had to remain for that period. And when the plane started to taxi off, behind where the plane was, there was a sort of hearse fence that was lined with police officers all sort of stationed on that fence. And when that plane, when he sort of gave it a wee bit more thrust, it blew the whole hearse fence over. Okay. And all the police officers were standing at a sort of 45-degree angle, holding onto their hats because of the power from that plane. I mean, it was something else. I was quite pleased we were off to the side, so we didn't have to worry about that. And then obviously Her Majesty then left and made her way down south.
But the details of that right down to your hearses were different to usual as well, weren't they?
They were, yeah. So the colour of our fleet is we use what's called palladium silver. So we're not a black colour. A lot of people will know that. We're sort of quite well known for that. But for the funeral for Her Majesty, we had to have black vehicles. Now this was something a number of years ago that always slightly kept me awake at night, that if we need vehicles at short notice, how exactly are we going to do this? And so what we actually decided to do was we actually had 2 hearses, because we have to have the reserve as well, and we put them aside from our everyday fleet, and we actually got them wrapped in black. So those vehicles are the sort of silver grey colour of our vehicles underneath, but they were wrapped in black, and to all intents and purposes it looks like a black vehicle. We got it done at a very high-end company that did it for us, so all the door frames and everything, because you couldn't have it that you open the door and you see the silver and the inside. So everything was black, and to be honest, nobody would have known that those were silver vehicles. But it was good because it meant that we had these vehicles put aside. They were garaged up in our garage, we still have them, and they're on sort of trickle charges, so if we need to pull them out at short notice, they're ready to go. But it means that we're not having to pull away from our everyday fleet. I suppose being involved in Her Majesty's funeral, yes, it was, a real honour and it was a big event to be involved in, but every funeral is something that we're involved in that's a real honour and it's a big event for the families. The last thing we could do would be to turn to another family that we've already arranged a funeral with and say, I'm really sorry, but Her Majesty's now died. We can't now, you can't have your funeral with us. So by having these vehicles as surplus to our everyday fleet, it meant that we didn't ever have to worry about having to do that. And it meant that these vehicles were there, ready, should we need them at short notice.
Thank you. As a company, Tim, you've just mentioned you offer families a bespoke service and the ceremony tailored to their wants and needs. What have been some of the more unique services that you've been involved in as a company?
Sure. I mentioned earlier that choice is a big thing these days. The days of having a funeral service in a Church of Scotland with the Church of Scotland minister with the same 2 hymns and the service really read out of the Book of Commendation, that has gone. Now, we will still have a lot of funerals that happen in a Church of Scotland church, of course, but they've all become quite personalised. And I think that's a big change, and I actually think that's a really positive change as well. So, as I said earlier, our attitude is always, as long as it's legal and it's decent, then why would we not look to do this? And so we have been asked for many different things over the years, and we're always happy to try and allow families' wishes to come true. Yes. So, for example, having a horse-drawn hearse is something that we've been able to provide for families on numerous occasions. Even if a family want all the horses to be white horses or black horses or a mixture, we can do that.
Presumably you don't have stables.
We do not have stables, so we have to hire these in from an external company.
Yes.
But do you know what? We can easily do that. Likewise, a motorbike hearse is something that we've been asked for several times as well. And again, we don't have a motorbike hearse, but we're more than happy to provide this and liaise and get it so that it happens. And again, if people have a particular model of motorbike hearse, whether it's a Harley Davidson or a Triumph or whatever, we can usually get that to happen as well. I suppose the other sort of maybe slightly more unusual request that we've had is we've had maybe a marching band that have led the hearse in at the crematorium, and maybe even gone into the crematorium chapel, you know, as we bring the coffin in for the start of the service. Woodland burials is something that has become a much bigger thing over the years, and you know, there's different options as to where that can happen. There's a woodland burial site out in East Lothian that we've used quite a lot.
I know it well. Yeah.
Binningwood,
Yes.
and it's a beautiful site.
Yes.
If you think of a woodland burial, that is probably what you're imagining.
Yes.
And you know, we can tailor the funeral right down to the type of coffin that's used to make sure that it's environmentally friendly as possible. And you know, so there's lots of different options there. During COVID, which was a particularly difficult period for us, we had a drive-through funeral where all the family members turned up, people who were attending turned up in their own vehicles, and they didn't have to leave their own vehicle.
Okay.
It was somebody that owned a bit of land, so it took place on their land, and people didn't have to leave their vehicle, but it meant that they could attend the funeral service. So, you know, thinking outside the box is encouraged by us, and
Yes.
you know, we will always try and honour these things. We've had a Bentley funeral where you know, the car that's been used has been a Bentley for the coffin, but also all the mourners, and they were part of sort of like the Bentley Association. So other people turned up with their Bentleys, and there was a huge sort of tail of cars that followed along behind, cortege with Bentley cars.
Okay.
So, you know, all of these are sort of things that we're more than happy to look into and try and organise.
Have you come across the yellow Reliant Robin that's used as a hearse down south? I think it is.
I have seen it.
Yes.
We've never been asked for that yet.
No.
The one from Only Fools and
Yes,
Horses. Yes,
uh-huh.
I have seen
with
it.
Batman and Robin chasing down the
Yep.
street after
Yep.
it for the funeral
I have
service.
seen it, and if a family were to ask for that, of course we would do our best to do it. There's also, I'll tell you, another thing down south that we've seen that again we've never been asked for, but we could easily get, is a double-decker bus, where the coffin actually travels in the bus, and all the mourners can travel in the bus as well. So everybody ultimately travels together. It's like your old London bus, you know, the Routemaster ones. So
Yes.
that is something else that you know, I have seen. We've never been asked for it, but I know that it's out there. So there are different options and things that people can ask for. I mean, some of the other sort of requests that we've had is maybe people that have their own land who have requested for somebody to be buried on their own land. Now, that's not necessarily something I would often recommend in a residential area, but if it's a family sort of farm or something like that, then of course we can look into it. There's different things that we have to do. We have to speak to different levels of people to make sure that we can do that,
Yes.
but it's something that we have done. So,
And of course, it has to be on title deeds that
Exactly.
there are human remains in the land.
yeah.
Your company is part ownership, I believe, of a crematorium in St Andrews. So just why did you choose to do this as a company, and do you think it's going to be something that might be more common in future, that the crematoria are run instead of by the council, by funeral director companies?
Yeah, so I'll go back one step.
Yes.
We're actually involved in 2 crematoria, which I probably should have informed you about, but
Okay.
we have one just outside Aberdeen as well,
Okay.
and one outside St Andrews. The one outside Aberdeen was the first one that we were involved in, and it's been running now for probably about 7 or 8 years. Really, what happened is, for both of these crematoria, we are a third owner partners, I suppose, in them. Different partnerships with the 2 of them, but we're a third. Now, the one outside Aberdeen was a local funeral director in that area who he saw the need for a local crematorium outside of Aberdeen. So it's in Aberdeenshire as opposed to Aberdeen City. And he always sort of thought this was something that he wanted to do, but he probably just didn't really know how to go about it and make it happen. And he'd already earmarked the area and, you know, had sort of these ideas. And so he approached a monumental mason company, Robertson's Memorials, and asked them if they could potentially get involved with him. And they, between the 2 of them, they then approached us as a larger independent company to ask if we
Yes.
would want to get involved as well. Every council has to provide facilities for crematoria or for burials. Okay?
Okay.
Now, it doesn't mean that the crematoria has to be in that council. but obviously they'll have guidelines on the sort of distance away from travelling distances that it has to be. Not every council will want to build a crematorium. The reason being, they're not cheap to build. Yes. There's a lot of costs involved in obviously buying the land, but then the actual building of the crematorium. And then you have the actual cremators are expensive and they have a lifespan, so all of this has to be sort of, counted for. And I suppose a lot of councils just don't have the cash to be able to build these things. So a lot of them are quite happy for private investors to potentially get involved. And I think for us, we have the office in Inverurie, which is just outside of Aberdeen, the office in Elgin as well. And I suppose for us, we felt that the facilities that they currently have in the area, they're probably not as good as they could be, but also outside of Aberdeen City, there wasn't really any other facilities. So it kind of met our sort of viewpoint of what we think about choice and about, trying to push things forward so that things are better for the clients who are then, using these facilities. So that was really why we decided to get first involved with it. For us, it's not actually about the money. We have never made any money from either of these crematoria. It's about investing in the future and making sure that these are something that give the clients a better service.
Yeah, it's investing in your community.
Yeah. I mean, obviously it is a long-term investment, but it's a long-term investment. It's not a short-term investment at all. But that was really why we wanted to get involved. And then the opportunity came just outside St Andrews. And we have the office in St Andrews, and again, Dundee is the closest crematorium. Yes. Now, what you find in Fife is that people do not like to cross the Tay Bridge and head over into Tayside. And there was nothing else in the Fife area at all, other than right down south. We've got in Dunfermline and in Kirkcaldy. Yes. But North Fife, there's nothing in that area at all. And so that was another reason why we felt to get involved. Again, it's about choice. It's about providing hopefully a top-class facility. And again, we've instilled in our staff in both these crematoria that when families or funeral directors approach them and ask them for something, the answer should be yes, unless there's a reason not to do it. Quite a few of our crematoria, the answer often is no, yes, because it's a bit of a hassle and it's something that, it's going to put them out. And so we've really tried to drum that into our staff. Look, it might put you out a little bit. It might be something unusual. It might mean you have to do a little bit of legwork to get this to happen. But why not? This is the final journey for somebody. This is the final send-off. This is what people are looking for. So let's make it happen. And so hopefully we've enabled that to happen. We've purposely not put in lots of times for both these crematoria as well, so that they're quite staggered, so that you're never really running into the back of another funeral. Okay. So you're never arriving and the previous funeral's leaving. The family are never really getting sort of told, listen, you've only got 5 minutes left to shake the hands of the next 100 people that are still to come out here. We've tried to do away from that so that people feel that they're not rushed, they've got the time. They're both in quite beautiful settings as well, with rolling hills, and so that the sort of outlook of both of them is very nice as well.
That can be a really terrible thing at the end of the service when you're rushing your party away and you can see the next funeral queued up to come in. It's very uncomfortable. It's
not good for anybody, because the family who are still sort of wanting to greet people as they leave, they're feeling that they're not getting that opportunity. But also the next funeral that's coming in, they sort of feel, well, these people are overstaying. We need to sort of move them on because our funeral needs to start, which I understand that viewpoint. Yes. But it doesn't really serve anybody well. So we have quite big times in between the services so that never happens.
One thing, Tim, about crematoria, and it seems to panic a lot of celebrants, is the kind of rise in direct cremations. I wonder if that's something that you're picking up on. Is that something you're increasingly asked for, and what might that ultimately mean for the funeral industry?
The short answer is yes. We've had a little bit more sort of requests for direct cremations. Now, I think there's an educational piece that has to be done here to families as to what is meant by a direct cremation. In the industry, a direct cremation means that we would collect the deceased from where they've died and we would take them straight to the crematorium, and nobody sees them, nobody is involved in the funeral service. The family don't even really know the day and the time of when this happens, and at a later stage they can get the ashes back if that's what they wish for. What our general sort of experience has been is that families are not actually wanting that. What they want is they want to still have some sort of service, but maybe just not attend at the crematorium.
Yes.
And as I say, the educational piece is something that we're trying to work with families and chat through. I think for some families, a direct cremation, what I've explained, is appropriate for them, if that's what they're looking for. But I think if people are not aware of what they're asking for, that's where our job has to come in and explain just what they're looking for. When we think about why we have a funeral service, it's not for the person who's died, it's for everybody else.
Yes.
That's the reason we have a funeral service. And as long as the people who are arranging the funeral and going to be potentially attending the funeral know what they're asking for, then I have no problems with that, as long as they're all happy that that's what they're going for. We often get told, you know, my dad has died, he didn't want any fuss, he doesn't want anyone to attend at the funeral service. But the family members are saying, but he's our dad,
yes,
and we would quite like to have something. And how do we deal with this? How do we honour his wishes whilst at the same token honour our own sort of viewpoint here as well? And so often what we're finding is we will have a service in our service room here in our office with a smaller number of people, where a celebrant or somebody takes the service, and then we would take the coffin from here directly to the crematorium where nobody attends.
Yes.
And I think on one level, by doing it that way, families are getting what they're looking for, whilst they still feel that they're honouring their father's wishes. As I say, if a family say, no, we're quite comfortable that it is a direct cremation, then I have no problem with that at all. But as I say, often in conversation, when we speak with families, that is not actually what they're looking for. And there's a bit of work to be done to explain and make sure that what the family are getting is what they're looking for as well. I think one of the dangers I see with a direct cremation is if people cannot afford a full funeral, and so therefore this is seen as a way that they can have a cheap funeral, that worries me, because what we're really saying is you can't afford to grieve properly, you can't afford to have a service, so therefore that's the route that you've got to go down. And I worry about that.
And that kind of message is perpetuated in daytime television all the time. I don't want my family to worry about it, therefore I'm having a direct cremation.
And I think if we look back to COVID, one thing we learned from COVID is when people were told they could not attend a funeral service, there was an awful lot of people that actually that caused a bit of distress to them. It also has not allowed them to grieve properly. I do still worry that we're maybe still going to see a little bit of the overhang or the effects of COVID with people in their grief journey, because they've not been able to have that closure. And so I think for people to be told you cannot have a funeral, therefore the direct cremation is the option that we're going to have, that concerns me. And like I say, there are ways of honouring the person who's died's wishes whilst allowing families to have some sort of celebration where they remember their life. And it might be that the coffin is not present for that. It might be that happens after the cremation has happened. But I do think for some people they need to have that closure by having a service where they remember the life of somebody who has died.
Yeah, I've done a few services here in Oakvale, and then the coffin has just left for a direct cremation, and it's still a moving service, and it's a lovely space that you have in Oakvale as well for that, and it seems really meaningful when you do it.
Yeah.
Just one last question really, Tim, and it's connected to that idea of direct cremation. Are there any future trends that you envisage in the funeral industry that's going to take it off in new and interesting directions?
The funeral industry is quite a slow changing industry compared to most other industries. You know, if I speak to any of my friends that are involved in IT or you know, anything like that, things change very quickly. In our industry, it takes a long time to change. I think probably the main thing that we have seen, and I think we will see more of, is I've mentioned about choice. And I think that's something that we're going to see more of. Personalisation of funerals and people coming up with what their wishes are. Could this be done? Can we have this? How about, you know, having it in this setting, at this location? And all of these are things that I think are good for our industry. Again, it goes back to, we're a service industry. We're here to provide a service for the families that we're coming into contact with, and if they have wishes for something particularly, then we should be looking to do that. So I think that's probably the biggest trend. I couldn't tell you what things are going to come around the horizon, but
Yes.
we have seen over the years that things are asked for that we would never have dreamt of sort of imagining that would be part of a funeral service.
Yes.
Already we've had that. But I think that's probably going to happen more and more. We've talked about the direct cremation. I do think that for some people a direct cremation, is the right thing. And I do think it plays its part. But I do think that it's probably not going to continue to rise at the rate that we've maybe seen it. It's probably more going to plateau off or potentially even drop a little bit. Like I say, I think the biggest changes that we're going to see in the future are around choice and families getting what they would wish for.
Yeah. Tim, this has been a fantastic conversation, and thank you so much for hosting us, for your time, and for your highly engaging chat. It's been an honour to sit with you and while away an hour or so today. On behalf of the Academy of Professional Celebrants, we'd like to make a donation of £200 to your chosen charity for your time, and I believe that charity is Bethany Christian Trust. I wonder if you might just tell us a little bit about that charity and what's important about the work that it does. I know it personally, it's a wonderful charity.
Yeah. We do have a charitable giving policy here in the company where we give away a percentage of our profits every year. And we'd always do that quietly, discreetly. We don't sort of tend to advertise it or publicise it or anything at all. But Bethany Christian Trust is one that we have supported for many, many years. I think the work that they do is invaluable. We've always seen one of our duties, I suppose, is to help people that are less fortunate, less well off than ourselves. And Bethany Christian Trust really fit that in many ways. They obviously provide work with homeless people in Edinburgh, but wider than that as well, in Glasgow, other cities throughout Scotland. But they also service people who are struggling with addiction problems as well. And I think from our point of view, we see this as a valuable ministry that we can get involved in by helping, by providing some finance where they can do their work. And we just see it as a really valuable thing. So that's why it plays a big part in our sort of ethos as well.
Yeah, and for those of you who aren't maybe familiar with Edinburgh or something, that there are dozens of volunteers out with Bethany Christian Trust on a regular basis, and soup vans and alike as well, aren't there?
Yeah.
Tim, I hope that William Purves as a business continues to go from strength to strength, and I personally look forward to continuing to work with your fantastic staff in the near future. Can I remind those of you who are listening or watching the podcast rather today to get in touch with me if you have any ideas or you want to take part in future podcasts, and the address for that is derek@apcuk.org. Tim, we ask celebrants who are taking part in the podcast to share with us a favourite short poem or Bible reading or a piece of prose that they find particularly meaningful, and I wonder if you might be so kind as to continue with that tradition for us today and share something that's meaningful to you. So thank you again for your time, and thank you for today.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me. Really appreciated it. It's been good to chat.
Yes.
We've never hidden the fact that a number of us in the company, certainly the directors, the ones that run the company, we are committed Christians, and our faith means quite a lot to us. So I think it's probably quite apt that I read some verses from the Bible. And where I wanted to take us to is Romans chapter 5. And if I start at verse 6, it says, "You see, at just the right time, while we were still powerless, Christ died for the ungodly. Very rarely will anyone die for a righteous man, though for a good man someone may possibly dare to die. But God demonstrates his own love for us in this: while we were still sinners, Christ died for us." I suppose in my journey, in my faith, this really sums it up, that, we can't do a lot of things on our own strength, and really it's because of what Christ has done for us by dying on the cross and taking the burdens of our sins that we're able to have that relationship with him. So these verses mean quite a lot to me in certainly how I live my own life and how I try to run our business as well on those Christian values.
So thank you so much.
Thank you.
That was very powerful way to end.
Thank you.
You have been listening to the podcast of the Academy of Professional Celebrants. We'd love you to be a part of our community. We offer training in all aspects of celebrancy, so why not check out our training program on our website to see if there's a course you can take part in. We have trained hundreds of celebrants who are all now well established in their own businesses. Our post-training support network is second to none, and you can be sure that help and inspiration is never more than a message away. Keep looking out for more podcasts coming soon. The Academy of Professional Celebrants.
Your success is our success. The Academy.